Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Molly Silberberg, and I run BAM's Humanities Programming. Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to our 17th season of Eat, Drink, and Be Literary. Over the years, it's been a joy to come together to celebrate the work and careers of some of today's leading literary voices. While we had to postpone most of last season's programming, we're grateful to be able to, at long last, welcome Tayari Jones to BAM and to Eat, Drink, and Be Literary. It's also a pleasure to welcome back longtime series moderator Deborah Treisman. Before I go any further, I want to acknowledge the land that I am on today and on which BAM's physical buildings are located, which is the unceded land of the Lenape people. I acknowledge Indigenous stewardship of this land and honor the Lenape elders, past and present, as well as future generations. I also want to acknowledge the moment we are in today. As we see one step towards accountability for George Floyd and his family, we also have a long way to go towards justice in the face of systemic anti-Black racism in this country. A few notes on tonight's program. In our Zoom webinar tonight, our speakers will be visible and audible, but audience members will not be. Tonight's program includes closed captioning, which you can turn on by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Many thanks to Jamie for captioning this evening and for making tonight's program more accessible. Our friends at Greenlight Bookstore have created an Eat, Drink, and Be Literary reading list, which you can purchase all of this season's authors' books, which we'll be posting a link to in the chat. And we will have time for questions towards the end of the discussion. So if you would like to ask a question, please do so in the Q&A module, which is also located at the bottom of your screen. This series has always been made possible with the help of sponsors and partners. I'd like to thank our season sponsor, Bloomberg Philanthropies, and to all of BAM's members and patrons, thank you for your continued support. I'm grateful to partner and co-curate the program with my colleagues at the National Book Foundation. Throughout the year, they host a range of incredible programs that help bring great literature to a wide range of audiences across the country. I'm going to turn the virtual stage over to my colleague, Natalie Green, Public Programs Manager at the National Book Foundation, who will tell you more about this evening's program.
Thanks, Molly, and good evening, everyone. I'm Natalie Green, the Public Programs Manager at the National Book Foundation, and thrilled to join you all for the 17th season of Eat, Drink, and Be Literary, alongside our partner, Brooklyn Academy of Music, and bookseller extraordinaire, Greenlight Bookstores. Tonight, we celebrate the work of National Book Award honored author Tayari Jones. Many thanks are due to Molly Silberberg and the whole BAM team for their care and collaboration. Since 1950, the National Book Foundation has presented the National Book Awards to honor the best literature in America. Through public programs and our education and access initiatives, we work year-round to reach readers everywhere. Over the past few years, we've visited 40 states and donated 1.6 million books to children and families living in public housing communities, expanding the reach of our book donations and national partnerships now to college students and readers inside of prisons and detention centers. This spring, we were able to send copies of An American Marriage to our friends in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and delight in their adoration for the book. There is never a moment where Tayari Jones' work doesn't feel prescient. Tayari is a writer and teacher and thinker, someone who constantly uplifts those around her, committed to mutual aid inside and outside of her fiction. It is always an honor to pay tribute to her and her work. For tonight's event, I will introduce our moderator, Deborah Treisman, who will in turn introduce Tayari, who will then read from her work. Like Molly mentioned, we'll open up to a few questions from the audience after they chat, so make sure to pop those into the module. And now I'm delighted to welcome Deborah Treisman, the fiction editor at The New Yorker. She is the host of that publication's award-winning fiction podcast, the editor of the anthology 20 Under 40 Stories from The New Yorker, and the recipient of the 2012 Maxwell Perkins Award for Distinguished Contribution to Fiction. Enjoy the program.
Hi, everyone. One of the great pleasures of introducing things in Zoom times is that you get to say things like pop your questions into the module. In the past, it was raise your hand. So it's a pleasure to be here tonight and to welcome you to tonight's event. Tayari Jones is the author of 4 novels, including Leaving Atlanta, which won the Hurston Wright Legacy Award for debut fiction in 2003, and most recently An American Marriage, which won the Women's Prize for Fiction and was acclaimed by everyone from Oprah to Bill Gates to Barack Obama. Whether she's writing about a series of child murders or broken families or class and race in the South, or the disorientation and cruelty of mass incarceration in this country, she writes from the inside out, from the child's mind, from the mind of the inmate, from the mind of his wife. As Michael Chabon said, Tayari Jones is blessed with the vision to see through to the surprising and devastating truths at the heart of ordinary lives, strength to wrest those truths free, and a gift of language to lay it all out compelling and clear. Please welcome Tayari Jones.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm going to read from a little bit from the beginning of An American Marriage. This is from the point of view of Celestial, newlywed, on the day that her husband is tried for a murder she knows he did not for a murder, tried for an assault that she knows that he did not commit. What I know now is this: they didn't believe me. 12 people and not one of them took me at my word. There in the front of the room, I explained that Roy couldn't have raped the woman in room 206 because we had been together. I told them about the magic fingers that wouldn't work, about the movie that played on the snowy television. The prosecutor asked me what we had been fighting about. Rattled, I looked to Roy and to both our mothers. Banks objected, so I didn't have to answer, but the pause made it appear that I was concealing something rotten at the pit of our very young marriage. Even before I stepped down from the witness stand, I knew that I had failed him. Maybe I wasn't appealing enough, not dramatic enough, too, not from around here. Who knows? Uncle Banks, coaching me, had said, now is not the time to be articulate. Now is the time to give it up. No filter, all heart. No matter what you're asked, what you want the jury to see is why you married him. I tried, but I didn't know how to be anything other than well-spoken in front of strangers. I wish I could have brought a selection of my art, the Man Moving series, all images of Roy. I would say, this is who he is to me. Isn't he beautiful? Isn't he gentle? But all I had were words, which are light and flimsy as air. As I took my seat beside Andre, not even the Black lady juror would look at me. It turns out that I watch too much television. I was expecting a scientist to come and testify about DNA. I was waiting for a pair of good-looking detectives to burst into the courtroom at the last minute, whispering something urgent to the prosecutor. Everyone would see that this was a big mistake, a major misunderstanding. We would all be shaken but appeased. I fully believed that I would leave the courtroom with my husband beside me. Secure in our home, we would tell people how no Black man is really safe in America. But 12 years is what they gave him. We would be 43 when he was released. Roy understood that 12 years was an eternity because he sobbed right there at the defendant's table. His knees gave way and he fell into his chair. The judge paused and demanded that Roy bear this news on his feet. He stood again and cried, not like a baby, but in a way that only a grown man can cry, from the bottom of his feet up through his torso and finally through his lips. When a man wails like that, you know that it's all the tears he was never allowed to shed, from Little League disappointment to teenage heartbreak, all the way up to whatever injured his spirit just last year. As Roy howled, my fingers kept worrying a rough patch of skin beneath my chin, a souvenir of scar tissue. When they did what I remember as kicking in the door, what everyone else remembers as opening it with the key, after the door was open, however it was open, we were both pulled from the bed. They dragged Roy into the parking lot and I followed, lunging for him, wearing nothing but a white slip. Someone pushed me to the ground and my chin hit the pavement. My slip rode up, showing everything to everyone as my tooth sank into the soft skin of my bottom lip. Roy was on the asphalt beside me, barely beyond my grasp, speaking words that didn't reach my ears. I don't know how long we lay there, parallel like burial plots. Husband, wife, what God has brought together, let no man tear asunder. While Roy is in prison, they communicate through letters. And I'm just going to finish by reading the first letter that he sends to her. Dear Celestial, I don't think I've written a letter to anyone since I was in high school and assigned a French pen pal. And that whole thing lasted about 10 minutes. I know for sure this is the first time I ever wrote a love letter, and that's what this is going to be. Celestial, I love you, I miss you, I want to come home to you. Look at me, telling you the things you already know. I'm trying to write something on this paper that will make you remember me, the real me, not the man you saw standing in a broke down country courtroom, broke down myself. I was too ashamed to turn toward you, but now I wish I had, because now I would do anything for one more look. This love letter thing is uphill for me. I've never even seen one unless you count the third grade. Do you like me? Check yes, no. Don't answer that. A love letter is supposed to be like music or like Shakespeare, but I don't know anything about Shakespeare. But for real, I want to tell you what you mean to me, but it's like trying to count the seconds of the day on your fingers and toes. Why didn't I write you love letters all the while so I could be in practice? Then I would know what to do. That's how I feel every day in here, like I don't know what to do or how to do it. I've always let you know how much I care, right? You never had to wonder. I'm not a man for words. My daddy showed me that you do for a woman. Remember that time you damn near had a nervous breakdown because it looked like the hickory nut tree in the front yard was thinking about dying? Where I'm from, we don't believe in spending money on pets, let alone trees. But I couldn't bear to see you fret, so I hired a tree doctor. See, in my mind, that was a love letter. The first thing I did as your husband was to sit you down, like the old folks say. You were wasting your time and talents doing temp work. You wanted to sew, so I made it happen. No strings. That was my love letter to say, I got this. Make your art. Rest yourself. Do what you need to do. But now, all I have is this paper and this raggedy ink pen. It's a ballpoint, but they take away the casing, so you just have the nib and this plastic tube of ink. I'm looking at it thinking, this is all I have to be a husband with? But here I am trying. Love always, Roy.
Thank you. I feel I should be waiting till later in our conversation to get to this, but I'm wondering how it feels to read that scene of the wrongful arrest of a Black man on the day that Derek Chauvin was convicted.
This has been a wonderful day. Because Derek Chauvin was convicted, I mean, there was just such a sigh of relief, because if he had not been convicted, it would make you think, could anyone be convicted ever? But at the same time, there's a kind of a sadness that in order to get the conviction, it had to be this incredibly overwhelming, no shred of ambiguity case. And I think about that when I think about, this idea of the foibles of the justice system is that, yes, too many cops get off, but also too many innocent citizens are imprisoned right now, some for crimes they didn't commit, but some for incredible sentences for small crimes also.
Yes, and we don't know today what today's sentencing will be, but I feel so that, this book obviously was written a few years ago, long before the pandemic, before George Floyd, before any of this. But you did draw on research from about real cases, right?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, it was written before this summer, but this phenomenon has been going on since, before any of us were born.
Yeah.
And I went to Harvard. I had a Radcliffe Institute fellowship, and I went to Harvard to study incarceration. I knew I wanted to, for the first time, kind of take my writing away from musing over my own autobiography and to engage something larger than myself. And so I went and did all this research on incarceration. And I felt like I learned a lot, and I was outraged, I was horrified, but I wasn't inspired. Because for me, I can only write a novel from a place of moral ambiguity. I have to write a novel looking for the answer to a question. And when I was trying to write a novel about wrongful incarceration, I didn't have any ambiguity. Like there was no other side to it. It's kind of like this Derek Chauvin moment. There's no other side. I can never write a novel about this moment right now because it has to be something where I'm not sure where it's right and where it's wrong.
So what led you to this particular case, the idea for this novel?
This was really serendipitous. Just imagine, I'm at Harvard, they want a presentation for what I've been working on, and I've been working so hard, but I don't have any work to show. So I went to Atlanta, my hometown, where I've moved back. I live in Atlanta now, but at the time I would go to Atlanta to kind of fill the well of my imagination. And while I was there, I observed a young couple in the food court. They were in love and in trouble. She looked fantastic, shoes, hair, bag, like she looked great. And he looked fine. And I heard her say, clear as a bell, she said, Roy, you know you wouldn't have waited on me for 7 years. And I looked at him, I looked at her, they looked at me, and we were all in agreement that he would not have waited on her for 7 years. But then he turned to her and said, I don't know what you're talking about. This wouldn't have happened to you in the first place. And I was intrigued because they were both right, but they didn't agree, and they were talking past each other. And that's when I got the idea to write about a couple separated by a wrongful conviction. Though one of the things I think about, who knows what those people were really arguing about? You could have been in the Peace Corps, who knows?
You might have been married to someone else. When you actually sat down and started writing it, did you feel that all that research and knowledge was in the way, or did it help fuel what you were doing?
A lot of it was in the way, because when you know a lot of statistics and facts, you have to fight the urge for your characters to suddenly look at the camera and say, are you aware that 1 out of 4 Black men in Washington, D.C. will have an encounter with the police, and then go back to the story? And they can't do that. They can't turn around and say everything you know. So in that way, it was difficult. But the research that helped me most was looking at oral histories, because I did not want to travel to prisons and go tell people, tell me your pain for my book. But if people participated in an oral history project and they wanted their stories out there, and I mined the oral histories for what I call the minutia of deprivation, because I wanted to be able to show what Roy was going through without the reader having to experience it all vicariously.
And in this case, with this novel, you started, in a sense, with an issue and then found your way into the story. What about with the novels before that? What did you start with?
Well, with my first novel, Leaving Atlanta, it's about growing up in Atlanta during the Atlanta child murders. Well, I grew up in Atlanta during the Atlanta child murders. So I didn't really feel tension between the issue of the child murders and story, because I cannot imagine childhood. So when I think about childhood, I also think about that. Like when I think about being 10 years old and being fitted for a training bra, I remember that my mother took me to Sears and Roebuck. Remember Sears? And you could get these really small bras, like size 28 AAA. And across from that section was the bank of televisions. They were selling televisions. And I looked up and I saw one of my childhood classmates' picture on the TV. So they will always be joined in story to me. I didn't have to join them.
Right. And for the other 2 novels, also you were drawing on your own life in a way?
Yeah, drawing on things that I remember and questions. Like Silver Sparrow is the story of a pair of sisters who have the same father. They have different mothers. I have 2 sisters and we have different mothers. And I've always been kind of obsessed is too strong of a word, but I always felt like I had sisters and didn't have sisters at the same time. Like I had sisters, but they lived in my peripheral vision, and I would turn my head and there was no one there. So I was able to draw from that, from my own, I guess I would say, emotional autobiography to access that material.
Mm-hmm. And all of your books are at least partly set in Atlanta. So I'm assuming the city is kind of a muse for you, that stories draw on the energy of the place.
I mean, Atlanta, it's my natural habitat. And when I wrote my first book, like I said, it was like many people, your first novel is your childhood. but I didn't know yet how the incredible misconceptions people have about the South, including especially the urban South. So when I wrote the first one, it was just from memory. And then I think I found myself kind of pushing back against what people thought my childhood must have been like, what they thought my growing up must have been like. And so I was writing with a little bit of regional chip on my shoulder. And then I think I just kind of just fell into it from homesickness when I was living in Brooklyn and I was writing to imagine that I was home. But one thing I have noticed in every book, the characters are spending less and less time outdoors because the landscape, I was losing my confidence in the landscape.
Right, right. So you would make visits home to see things.
And, people say, what is urban renewal or gentrification? Gentrification is when you get lost in your hometown. And I kind of get mad and refuse to use my GPS. I will drive around in circles before I will ask a machine how to get home.
So when you were growing up, your parents were both professors, I think, in political science and economics.
Yes.
At what point did you say, well, I'm going to do something different? I'm going to write stories?
Well, I always loved to write. I mean, it was my pleasure from when I was a very small child. I used to write little books and staple them and what have you. But I did not know that I could be a writer. I often tell people that when I was growing up in the 1970s and 80s, the question for girls, there were girls who were nice and girls who were fast. And that was the question of your parents. Is she a nice girl or is she a fast girl? And a girl who liked to read and write was a nice girl. No one ever said, what are you writing? What are you thinking about? But luckily for me, I went to college very young. I was only 16 when I enrolled at Spelman College. And when I was there, I met a writer and she was my teacher. Her name is Pearl Clegg. And Pearl said to me once, she said, what are you thinking about? And I got ready to tell her. And she said, no, write it down. And with that, she became my first audience and she took me seriously. Like she challenged me to take myself as seriously as she took me. And I just, I stepped into that space and I never look back. It changed my life.
Was it easy from the get-go? Did you feel that it just flowed and you knew how to do it? Or
I do think that I intuitively understand story. I mean, I teach, so I know there's some people who maybe intuitively understand dialogue or structure, but they don't know story. I understand what makes a story a story. The writing was never difficult. What was difficult for me was to declare myself as a writer. And it took the form of saying I wanted to get an MFA. I went to the University of Iowa to get a PhD in literature. I didn't even know they had a writing program there. I had never heard of it. And I met all these people and they were like, we are writers. And I was saying, oh, I too am a writer. And they were like, no, you don't understand. But I was studying I was 20 years old and I was studying to get a PhD. So it was as though I were a bird studying to be an ornithologist. And I had to get the courage to drop out of that program and say that, no, I was going to try and be a writer. And I was afraid that I was going to disappoint my parents. My mama said, if you don't get a PhD, you'll spend the rest of your life explaining why you don't have one. And I said, I don't think so. My mother says, yeah. I said, Mommy, it's a lot of people that don't have a PhD. She said, like who? Name one. So it was difficult for me to say I would be a non-PhD, but I've just got my courage. And I do believe that when you commit yourself to art, the universe will conspire with you. I actually had a chance encounter where I bumped into a woman in an elevator and it turned out that she not only did she run an MFA program, but she had read the one story that I had published like in the Clapham Review.
And remembered it.
Yes, because I have an unusual name.
I feel like we've been living parallel existences because we were born in the same year. We went to college at age 16. And my father still tells me I should get a PhD in my spare time.
When it's happening to you, it feels so unique, but there are a number of us. We should start a support group.
Maybe that's what this is tonight. So then you went and got an MFA.
I did.
And did you feel at home in that program? Was it suddenly, here's what I'm meant to be doing?
No, it was kind of a nightmare in a way. However, I did know that writing was what I was meant to be doing. I just think I wasn't meant to be. I don't think anyone feels at graduate school of any type is where they were meant to be. But I did feel very proud of myself for saying, I am going to do this. I am moving to Arizona where I don't know anyone, and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to write a book. And I sat every day. I sat in my closet because my little apartment was so small. I had a desk and I had clothes in the closet too, and a little desk in there. And I would just work every day. And I would say to my little self, I'm going to finish this book before I turn 30. It seemed like such a thing, but I think it was one of the best decisions I made, not only for what I learned in the program, but the fact that I decided to do it. It was like I bet on myself.
And then, well, first of all, you published that first book that you wrote, and you published 2 more, and they were all well received. And then you had one that just blew up. And you're getting phone calls from Oprah, you're on Barack Obama's reading list. Were you expecting as strong a reaction to that book?
No, I mean, I don't know. It's just kind of mysterious. I wasn't expecting much of anything. I just knew I had done my best. And with every book I've written, I've had an experience with one reader, and I felt like, oh, this book was sent through me for you, one reader. I mean, you described my earlier books as being well received. I would say they weren't poorly received, but An American Marriage is the first of my books that was even reviewed by the New York Times. So I was kind of flying below the radar and doing the work for its own sake. I didn't have any dreams of Oprah or Obama or anything like that. No one could have been more surprised than I was. I mean, when I picked up the phone one day and it's Oprah, I was driving. I had to pull over. It was a lot.
Well, at least you didn't hang up on her thinking it was a prank call.
She has such a distinct, people say that to me all the time. She has a very distinct voice. Like, it's her.
Going back one step, I know you've talked about Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon as having kind of changed how you thought about what you could do in writing. I'm wondering if you can talk about that a bit, but also if there were other books and writers who you felt gave you insight into what you could do.
Well, Song of Solomon it's my favorite book of all time. And it really helped me because when I was writing An American Marriage, I initially wanted to write it entirely from the point of view of Celestial, the wife. And I got so much pressure to include her husband. People are saying, why don't you write about her husband? What is he doing? And then I got really kind of angry. And I said, I have a lot of friends, male friends who are writers, and no one has ever told them to rewrite their story from the point of view of a wife. It has never happened. It never will happen. But there was just so much pressure. And one thing I've learned about revision is that as a writer, when you revise, you don't lose anything because you still have your original draft. So you just put your pride aside and try something else. But I remember that Song of Solomon is one of the most fiercely feminist novels that Morrison has written. And her protagonist is a man, but it is through his journey of understanding the ways that masculinity has failed him that the reader is able to critique masculinity. And so I tried to use that kind of roadmap to write this story about the ways that masculinity meets injustice, meets, the institution of marriage, all of this. And I let Morrison be my North Star. The other writer that means the most to me is a poet, actually. I read something by the poet Lucille Clifton every day. It's on my desk next to my journal. And I just I do like, old people open the Bible and they just let their finger touch something and they say, that's the word of the day. I kind of do that with Miss Lucille's poetry.
How did you come to her work?
Well, I went to Spelman College, which is a historically Black college for women. And, she was on the curriculum all the time. Like you could take a class on anything and Lucille Clifton could pop up.
And I guess, just to be a little more topical, you've been living in Atlanta. When did you move back?
2018.
Okay. So you've been there for the whole pandemic.
Yes.
You were there for George Floyd, you were there for Rayshard Brooks. And
yes.
I saw that you wrote a profile of Keisha Lance Bottoms. What is the world like there for you as a writer? And what has it been like to live in lockdown in this kind of time in that city?
Well, Georgia never really shut down.
Right.
So it's kind of this feeling, well, during the height of the lockdown, when we weren't locked down, height of the not lockdown, there was this anxiety I had of watching people. And I felt like, no, I wanted to like save everyone or say, no, you should wear a mask, you should stay home. But I also realized I have a theory now of how many people couldn't stay home and how hard it is to ask people who work every day. How can you tell someone, oh, it's fine for you to work every day, but you can't go out for pleasure. You can only go out for your low-wage job. And I think that's one of the reasons why people were reluctant to stay in, because they had to go to work. So what's a few extra hours to have a drink? And I also saw the way, so many of the essential workers are Black women. And like I would order, my parents are in their 80s and I take care of them. And I would handle all their shopping because mommy and daddy are not allowed in the grocery store. So I would order their groceries. And this lady came, she was young, she delivered the groceries and she was chatty. I was up on my veranda talking to her and she said, oh, we drive down from Warner Robins, that's like 2 hours away. And because people don't get grocery delivery in the country. So we just drive and we sit and we wait for a bus. And I said, who's we? You have a partner? She said, no, it's me and him. And she opened her back door of her car and she took out a little baby, like 6 months old. And she like held his hand and said, wave, wave. And it just struck me then the way this inequality works, that this young woman and her baby are buying groceries for me and my parents. And that shook me. That to me is the defining event of the summer.
Were you involved in election issues at all?
I did the phone banking, I did the text banking, and I really felt like during the lead up to the election, I felt like I'm not doing enough. But I have to say that I helped people register to vote. But when the election results came in, I felt like my individual vote mattered in a way that I have never felt before. You remember that shake and bake commercial when the little boy says about cooking the dinner? He says, and I helped. Do you remember that commercial? That's how I felt when it rolled in and it came down to these Atlanta counties. I was like, and I helped.
Do you feel like, just the mood in the state is different than it used to be?
No, not particularly. I mean, I do think there is the excitement that, Georgia turned blue under the leadership of Stacey Abrams, who is a graduate of Spelman College. So, I have a t-shirt that says, let's turn Georgia Spelman blue. So that was exciting. But I think the important thing to note is that Georgia turned blue. I don't know so much that minds were changed, it's that different people got to vote. Right. New people were enfranchised. So that isn't exactly that the state changed. It's that people had access to the ballot. And that's such an important distinction.
And people made sure that they did have access to it, yes. And came out and pushed for it. Yeah.
I mean, I waited 5 hours to vote in the summer election, just a summer election. And I was out there for 5 hours.
Yeah. You're working or you've finished a new novel called Old Fourth Ward. Does that, where'd you go?
I am working on a novel, another Atlanta novel, but this novel, the way novels do it, novels do what they want to do. Like you think you're in charge of this novel and you kind of are, but you kind of aren't. And like, for example, I think that I thought my protagonist was my protagonist, but now I see that what I thought was my protagonist is my protagonist's daughter. That's a problem. But it happens, like an American Marriage, the protagonist changed on me. So I've learned to be open to these changes, but it's humbling. It's humbling. Nothing is more humbling than trying to write a novel.
American Marriage and Leaving Atlanta, you've got several protagonists. You've got different voices. Maybe you have a few in this?
I do. I just, for a while I was trying not to do that because, nobody wants to seem like a one-trick pony. And so sometimes you want to write something different just to prove to who, but to show that you can do something different. But the voices are coming the way that they're coming. And I'm saying that, It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Is it set in any kind of current world?
Yes, here's the thing though, what to do? Our current world is so unsettled. You don't want to write a novel where you're kind of putting forth a hypothesis of what tomorrow will be, and then tomorrow's not that. So do you set your novel right before the pandemic? Like, do you try to make it where the novel ends like January 18th, 2020? That's a real question, because you don't, it's hard. That is a big question for me, but I don't want people to wear masks. I don't want masks in the novel. I don't think I know yet enough what masks mean or how we'll think about these masks in 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard a lot of people say either you feel like you're writing historical fiction because you have to set it pre-pandemic, or you're writing sci-fi because you're setting it post.
Well, with An American Marriage, I deliberately didn't have Roy in prison during the Obama years.
Right.
So I had to scoot it back.
Right.
Because I didn't know when I was writing it. I said, we don't know yet what Obama means. And
right.
So I didn't want to try to guess.
One of the things that's fascinating to me about the book is the letters that you have. A lot of the book is taken up by letters between Roy and Celestial. And whenever anyone's writing a letter, they're not always telling the whole truth, right? So it must have been something for you to complicated for you to juggle what's being revealed, what's between the lines, what we can guess the writer of the letter is actually thinking. Was that challenging?
No, actually, the letters came most easily for me. I'm a letter writer myself, but also I wanted a way to, prison, the two features of prison is monotony and prison is brutality. And these are two things that as a reader, you don't want to experience vicariously. As a writer, I don't want to be in the weeds with that either. So with the letters, we only know what Roy chooses to share with Celestial. He protects her, then he protects us. So it actually gave me a way to get through and to cover a lot of time, gave me a lot of economy, because it's like about 112 pages. And that's his whole entire prison term conveyed through letters.
Then Celestial also has to be careful with her letters. And that's partly what she chooses to reveal about her life.
I mean, it's very tricky. I mean, here's the thing. Roy's in prison, she is not. There is this kind of adage where they say, oh, when someone goes to prison, all their loved ones go to prison too. That's not exactly true. Only the person in prison is in prison. The other people have challenges associated with it and it's traumatic, but only the person is locked up is deprived of their liberty. So Roy, she can only tell him so much about her life, some of it because he doesn't want to be a spectator to all the wonderful things that are happening to her. This part of it is holding back out of kindness and guilt, that survivor guilt that she has, all of that. So and the man that she has, but all of that is tied up to the fact that their relationship becomes so unequal, because people often say, well, he's loyal to her. And I'm like, of course he's loyal to her. I mean, that's what being loyal to her is what he's doing. It's the thing that it's asking something different. They are, like the old people say, I don't know, did old people in New York say this? They are unequally yoked. Y'all say that?
I don't know. I haven't said it.
Oh yeah, we say it in the South a long time, that you have to be evenly yoked. And then I was thinking of that phrase, evenly yoked, and how then, yoke is also the word that people use to describe slavery. Yeah. And there's a moment in there when Celestial's father says marriage is a peculiar institution.
Yeah. Yeah. So An American Marriage takes on, obviously, a huge social issue. I'm wondering if you feel like novels should address social issues, or political issues, or if that needs to be if that's what you look for in a novel.
I think novels can address political issues. The reason I am hesitant on that is that the burden of addressing political issues almost always falls on writers of color. I think that it would be interesting, if white writers, do an event and people are like, so tell me, what do you think about racism? Let them say, or how do you think whiteness has affected your book, and see what they say. I think it'd be interesting responses, but I think that people of color also want to write beach novels sometimes, or they want to write, horror. They want to write things like everything they write shouldn't have to be about racism, because then it takes their art and turns it into sociology. But I do think that there are excellent books that engage social issues, and there are excellent books that don't. But I also think on some level, not engaging a social issue is engaging a social issue, because it's a deliberate, it's a deliberate exclusion.
Right. But perhaps it's not for writers of privilege who
Well,
don't
it's
feel
not
that.
deliberate, but it kind of, I don't know. It's hard to, it's tricky, right? But I think the key is to just have a lot of people writing. Like, I was able to write An American Marriage and focus so much on this couple because the new Jim Crow already existed. If Beale Street Could Talk had already been written, there are enough Upstate by what's Kalicia's last name? Buchanan, Bucknan. But there are enough books already written about it that I didn't have to sit here and feel like I am writing the definitive book about what happens when you're married to someone in prison. So I could do something else.
Right. Write your own book. I think we need to open up to some of these questions in the Q&A module. So I'm just going to take a look through. Okay. Someone says, you're a beautiful writer. I wonder what advice you would give young people about becoming a writer. What do you wish someone would have told your younger self about writing?
I think the greatest gift I had when I was a young writer is that I never thought 1 second about what my career might be. I never thought I would make a cent. I never even thought, I think I hoped to be published, but I didn't know much about the business of writing. And that is the best thing. I tell my students, I say, no one ever comes away from a lecture about the publishing business and feels inspired to write. The most you can hope for is to feel inspired to hustle. But hustling isn't what we do. We just do our work. So my advice to young people is just to write, and don't worry that the story will find you and the story will find its way. But I also have advice to people who are not young who want to write, which is this. People say a writer writes every day. And I know why they say that, but it makes people who work or who are taking care of their parents or taking care of their kids, it makes them feel they can't be writers because they don't have every day. But you don't have to write every day. You just need to write frequently. And all the stuff you do, the child care, the elder care, the working, the activism, all of that is going to make your work better. So instead of looking at your life as competing with your writing, remember your life is enriching your writing. It's what's going to make your work meaningful.
We have a New Yorker saying, yes, we do say equally yoked in New York, Black New York, Church New York. So
migration thing.
You get a little confirmation there. Somebody would like you to describe your writing process. For example, do you have an idea and then flesh it out, or do you have the framework of a story and then fill in the details?
I have the smallest little kernel of an idea, and I sit and I write on my typewriters, and I try to figure out who the people are. So my first early drafts of characters are almost like robotic because I don't know them yet. It's just like people you meet in real life and you don't really know them. You just have these superficial impressions. And as you get to know them, it gets richer and deeper. But I have to do at least a good 150 pages writing about strangers. And I feel very alone when I do that. I feel that writing a novel is kind of the opposite of love. You know how romance is the most exciting at the beginning? Your heart is racing and you're so excited. For me, it's the opposite. For me, novels get good right at the end. And we all know romance is not good at the end.
There are a couple of questions, specific questions about An American Marriage. One is, where did you get the idea for Celestial to create those dolls, and did they have a special symbolism? And the other is, can you talk a bit about the parental figures in American Marriage and how you found your way with those characters?
I had really had a lot of fun with the parents. This idea of the generation gap is fascinating to me because particularly in Black communities, my life is so much different than my parents' life. My father grew up in a small town in Louisiana, like Roy, and 10 kids, 3 rooms. It's a whole different thing. He's the first of his family to get higher education. And so like when I wanted to become a writer, the reason they thought it was absurd, it wasn't just because it wasn't a PhD, but they felt like that's not a job, that's not a real thing. And they felt they wanted me to be safe and get this PhD. And as much as happened, similar to what's happening with Celestial in her marriage, is that her parents, they think that this, kind of a traditional marriage is what they have given her. Like all their hard work and struggle is so that she can be a proper wife. Even though all the parents in this story, they are all on their second relationships, but they all want to be the marriage police. But they believe that like just good old reproductive heteronormative marriage is the gift for the next generation. They shouldn't have to struggle. They should be able to be, American conventional. And she's pushing back against that.
And the other question was about where did you get the idea for Celestial to create the dolls? And did they have a symbolism for you?
Well, I have a good friend. Her name is Cosby Cabrera, and she is a doll maker. And her work, she's a doll maker, a dressmaker. She illustrates children's books. She's just an artist of artists. And she spends so much time on these dolls. They can take years. But, people regard them sometimes as gifts for girls. And I thought that's the perfect metaphor for the experience of the woman artist. I can remember when I was on an airplane, I'm sitting up in first class, I'm feeling fancy, I'm eating a little thing of warm nuts, I'm drinking champagne, and the man next to me says, "So what do you do?" Which means, how did you get up here in first class eating warm nuts and drinking champagne? And I said, "Oh, I'm a novelist." And he said, "Oh, have you written a romance novel?" And I said, "No, I've written a novel about the collateral effects of wrongful imprisonment." And he said, "Oh, that sounds interesting. I will buy it for my wife." Because he couldn't see me as writing anything that would have to do with him. So that was part of it. And the other part of it in the novel was I was interested in what I like to call the ethics of portrait making. When you're a writer, you draw from the people around you, and sometimes they like it and sometimes they don't. So Roy used to like it. Roy used to say, "Oh, I'm her manager and her muse." But then when her career is doing well and he's in prison, then he feels like she has stolen his space, stolen his story for her own gain. So it's really tricky because it's not just his story. I start the book, the epigraph is from Claudia Rankine, who says, "What happens to you doesn't belong to you. It's not yours only." And so that was one of the things that I was wrestling with, because it's something that I wrestle with in my own, practice.
I think maybe the man on the plane just didn't read novels. Maybe his wife's a good reader.
We'll give him that. But here, okay, this is the last thing. I know it's not a question, but it has taken so long for me to imagine people I don't know reading my work, because, for so long, primarily my books were read by my mother, who would buy several copies. I was in London Heathrow Airport, and it was early, and I saw a copy of my book way over yonder. And I said to myself, "Well, I must be so sleepy. How did I leave my book way over there?" And so then when they called me to get on my plane, I packed up all my stuff and I walked like 3 or 4 tables over, and I picked the book up off the table. And the man grabbed my wrist and said, "That's my book." And I said, "No, that's my book." But it just never occurred to me that someone who wasn't me was reading my book.
He must have been so excited.
We did take a selfie. We did. It was 6 a.m. and it was not cute, but I felt like it was the least that I could do.
I hope you signed it.
I was so sleepy and I was so stunned. At first he thought that I was being cute, but it just hadn't sunk in yet.
Yeah. Somebody writes, "I love how your novels seem to have just the right amount of words to get your point across perfectly. In the writing process, is it difficult for you to edit and pare down the information you've written in your first draft? Please explain how you cut out unnecessary content that might weigh your story down."
Well, thank you.
That's my job.
Well, this is what I do. I read the whole book out loud. And when I start chewing up the words, I know it's too many words in there. Like if I can't speak it, then I know it's too much to be on the page. Yeah. And also I discover I have this weird, I call it like this weird Dr. Seuss thing. I'll start rhyming, like I'll hear it out loud and I'm rhyming, and I'll take those rhymes out
Yeah.
because that's not what we're doing here. So the hearing the story, because storytelling is oral. And so hearing it helps me. And I just mark out mercilessly. I don't get attached to anything. I'll just take it out. Because I
So-
always imagine your book is being read by someone who doesn't really want to. So make it easy for them.
But you work on a typewriter, right?
I do. Several typewriters.
So you type this all out,
Mhm.
then you read it aloud, then you
Mhm.
cross everything out. You have to type everything again.
Yes,
Does it change in the retyping process?
a little bit, a little bit.
Why several different typewriters?
Well, one, I just love them so much, typewriters. So I have a lot of them, and you have to use them all to keep them, to keep them running. But the best ones are the ones from the 30s and 40s. That's when typewriters were luxury items, but it was late enough in typewriters' lives that they had learned how to make them well. Like the ones from like 1919, they're kind of dicey. They hadn't figured out typewriters yet. But you get yourself a good, like a Smith or a Corona from 1934.
And can you still get the ribbons?
Yes, I have a wonderful typewriter doctor in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he sends me the ribbons.
Why do you resist doing it on a computer?
Because if I write on the computer, I write too fast. It's like when you eat, you ever eat really, you're hungry and you eat really fast and the plate is empty. So clearly you ate it. I mean, who else could have eaten it? But you don't really remember it. That's how I feel when I write really fast. I'm not mindful in what I'm doing.
But you don't write by hand with a pen.
I will. I can write with, like, I can't take my typewriters places, even though, those typewriters were thought to be portable and they weigh like 18 pounds. But like if I'm on the road or something, I'll write by hand. I try not to get too, I feel like that's how you get writer's block, by telling yourself, I must use my Olivetti Valentine typewriter. I can only use a certain kind of paper. I can only, wear my lucky socks. I must face east. I must have my tea. Every time you give magic to something else, then you make yourself vulnerable because those things may not be available.
Yeah. Someone writes, I would just like Tayari to know that her words from Roy's perspective about women's ability to rearrange every molecule in the room to make it suddenly feel different is something I think about all the time.
Oh, thank you.
Unless anyone wants to type some more questions, I think we've covered everything that was in here. We can give it a little minute. And also, I can come up. What do you feel like in the course of writing 4 books? What do you feel was the most important thing you learned in the process? Does it get easier?
No, I mean, I think every book is hard in a different way, right? Your first book is hard because you don't know if you can write a book. You've never written a book. But then, by the time you get to your 4th book, most people, you've wrung every drop out of your autobiography. By the time you get your 4th book, you have to start from whole cloth, or you have to talk about something you didn't plan to talk about. Then, like on my 5th book, now I'm having for the first time to write. I'm writing in my own shadow. I have never felt terribly concerned about anybody wondering what my next thing was going to be. Like before, people would say, what are you working on next? Or just being polite to say that they're aware that I'm still alive. But now people are actually asking, and I'm having to push through that. I was just telling one of my students that everybody faces the blank page with the same amount of anxiety, just for different reasons. And then that is an equalizer, even though some of us, are writing with a contract. But if you have a contract, you're like, oh my God, can I fulfill my contract? If you don't have a contract, will I get a contract? And you just have to get quiet and write. And also you have to write, when novels require you to work for long stretches of time with no positive reinforcement, no likes, no shares, no nothing. You just have to sit there and work on it and be there with the page.
Do you have friends or relatives you turn to read something before anyone else?
Different people that I ask at different times. Like sometimes early drafts, you just want someone to tell you what they like. Don't tell me what you don't like. It's too early. So you have to know who that person is. It's very important that you have to know with whom you share your work, because you can sabotage yourself by sharing it with the wrong person. And like An American Marriage, the negative feedback I got, because when you write an unusual story, like I call it the tyranny of genre expectation. So when you say, I've written a novel and it's about a woman and her husband has been wrongfully convicted, people think, oh my God, it's going to be one woman's brave fight to free her man. And so when the novel is not polished and done and things aren't working, people say, you know what's not working? You're like, what? They're like, I think you need one woman's brave fight to free her man. And so then you end up in these fights with people that I had to almost stop talking to some friends of mine because they were just really pushing me to write that expected story. And so I just had to stop sharing it and started imagining that the characters themselves were my readers. And I had to imagine that Roy would say, yeah, that's what I did. Andre would say, ooh, that's what happened. And Celeste would say, oh my God, it's complicated, but yes, that's what happened. And I had to write for them because other people were really, really like, they were letting me down.
Well, we have a few more. This is someone just saying what you said about women's crafts was super meaningful to me, as well as the bit about POC writers deserving to be able to write about things that are not political. Thank you so much for sharing. Somebody else asks, what is your relationship with endings, and do you try different versions of endings?
You know, whenever people ask me, sometimes people often, they say, did you consider any different endings for that story? It always makes me feel like I was like in the store and you tell people, this is my baby. My baby's name is Ashley. And people are like, did you consider any other names? Like I always think it means they don't like my ending. But my thought about endings is that I think the story is over when the character understands or feels something different. So I ended not on thinking about what's going to happen plot-wise, but where the person is emotionally. So An American Marriage, I think, ends Roy at the end of An American Marriage, and I was stuck with no ending for about a year. And just think, this is when I was living in Brooklyn, so that means my editor was around the corner. I would run into her at Key Foods. It was a nightmare. But Roy gets out of prison, and Roy believes the moral measure of everyone in the story is how they can help him reclaim what he's lost, because he's lost so much. He's lost his job, he's lost his woman, he's lost his status, he's lost his career. And so he goes to everyone, can you help me? Can you help me? And most people try and help him. And he thinks that's what the end of the story is. Will my wife help me? But what I came to understand and had to share with him is that no, Roy, the question is you don't understand what you've really lost. And Roy, what you've really lost is the understanding that you have something to contribute to the people in your life. So that is how you become a citizen again of your own life. You become a citizen by contributing. And so when he comes to see that Celestial, she doesn't want to be his wife, but all the pressure and the guilt, all of that, and she is going to do it anyway. And also, Roy, is that consent? That's another question you need to think about. Is it consent? If your wife is with you just because she has to, is that consent? Or did you get out of prison being accused of being a rapist, and then you're gonna more or less force yourself on your wife through societal pressure? Is that how you want to be? And Roy had to say, no, Tayari, that's not how I want to be. And I said, great. Now, what are you going to do? And he says, I'm going to set her free. And in the act of saying to her, no, you don't have to do this, then he becomes a citizen again because he has done something for someone else. And he's able to move into the future with kind of an emotional growth. And I think he's going to be okay. I know he's never going to get his career back, all these other things, but he has gotten his citizenship back. So he's like enfranchised now in his own life.
Someone wants to know if you were rooting for Andre or Roy.
I'm on team everybody. Because here's the thing, I was rooting for Roy to get his emotional footing back. So I was rooting for all of them to be happy. I didn't think of this, as Andre said, this is not a who gets the girl. And that's the thing, like Roy lives in a world where he's like, the measure of what happens is who gets the girl. And Andre is like, she's not a thing to get. You can't steal her like you steal a wallet or a good idea, he says. Yeah. But I do think that Celestial and Andre do make a better couple. I do. I think they make a better couple.
Okay, we have to end this up. I'm just going to do one last question. which is when you wrote the Untelling, did the title come first or last?
Oh, titles for me are the last. I am terrible at titles. When it comes to titles, I'm like a 15-year-old girl writing in her journal all these names of your hypothetical children. Too many middle names, accent marks. I just do the most with titles. So I always know whenever I turn in a book, they're going to tell me to get a new title. And so I've just come to love that part of the process, the frantic last minute scramble for a title. Gets my blood pumping.
Well, thank you so much, Tayari.
It has been a pleasure.
It's been a total pleasure.
And I will just echo one more set of thanks. Thank you, Tayari. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And have a great rest of your evening.